and welcome back to Growing Old Around the Globe. I'm Sarah Kagan, and I'm joined by Ann Shoemaker, and our two special guests, Amy Corcoran and Liz McKenzie, whom I think you'll remember from their wonderful interviews for this week. We're really thrilled to have both of them with us for this webcast today. And welcome back to you. We hope you had a nice week off. We noticed continued activity on the discussion forums, and a number of questions came up that we hope we attended to in a timely fashion. But now we're really in the second half of the course. Ann and I are very much looking forward to what we think will be a pretty fast-paced 3 weeks, this week, next week, and of course our last week. And we're going to sort of start this webcast again with some reminders about course logistics. The first, and this has perhaps been the place where we've had the most numerous and most detailed questions and concerns. We realize a number of you, because we're still enrolling participants in the course even at this point, which is fabulous. We are so excited that generally 100 or more people are joining us each week to this point. But one of the questions that then comes up, of course, particularly in light of the fact that this is a summer course and a number of you are taking holidays and vacations during the time the course is running, is that if you joined the course after week 2, so if you've joined in the past couple of weeks, or if you're going to be away from the internet for a week or more for holiday or vacation purposes, it's really pretty impossible for you to fulfill the portfolio assignment requirements in order to meet the points required to receive a statement of accomplishment. Ann and I acknowledge that we had to put the standards for the portfolio someplace. We had to have a set of standards that we started the course with. We did modify those. For those of you who have been with us for the entire course, we did modify those. So remember, and there has been some confusion about this, and thanks to Margaret and Roseanne, two of our most active participants. Margaret and Roseanne, you're actually the most active participants on our discussion forums. Thank you for supporting your fellow participants in reminding them that the new point requirement to receive a statement of accomplishment is 7 points. But even that said, some of you who joined the course late or need to take a big break from it will not be able to receive the statement of accomplishment because there's just no way you can meet this 7-point requirement in terms of the time you're in the course. All of that said, Ann and I really want to emphasize that we hope, and we've seen this on the discussion, a couple of different discussion threads very recently this week, we hope that you find personal satisfaction and personal accomplishment in participating in the course in whatever way you find valuable and submitting whatever portfolio assignments for any or all of the weeks that you have been involved in the course. So please don't let the statement of accomplishment be the determining factor in whether you are staying with the course or not. Try to find real value in it and try to find what is most meaningful to you. And I think Ann's got some thank yous because you have all been amazingly active in the past couple of weeks.
I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who participated in our discussion forum and posted their YouTube videos for their video perspectives. I've enjoyed watching all of them. If you haven't seen them yet, go to the Video Perspectives forum in the discussion forum and take a look. They're wonderful. We'll also be compiling them together in one area as well for everyone to have easier viewing, and we'll let you know where that will be on the course page later today.
Wonderful. And Ann and I have been watching the statistics, as have Brian and Aram, and we are, again, really thrilled. In total, we have a global community of over 8,000 people. We have about 6,000 active participants, active Old Globers, and we've got about, sort of tallying it up, both based on those of you who post and those of you who comment on posts, probably 700 or 800 people who are actively involved in the discussion forums. And what's really remarkable is that each week we've got at least 1,500 Old Globe participants actively working on the course. And these are pretty incredible numbers, given that many MOOCs, many massive open online courses, have only a fraction of their enrollment, a very small fraction, say 2 to 4% sometimes, actively participating and completing the course. We're really thrilled with how many of you are passionately engaged in Old Globe. So I think that, Anne's got another logistic piece. Yes.
I am currently on Twitter and on the discussion forum, so please post your questions for Dr. Corcoran and Dr. McKenzie on the Webcast forum and on Twitter, our Twitter feed, at Old Globe MOOC, so we can field your questions.
Right, because Anne curates all of your questions that we're going to ask Amy and Liz to address during the rest of this webcast. And that's probably a segue into the content portion of our webcast. And perhaps one of the best places to start, rather as we did with week 3, so 2 weeks ago when Herb Smith was with us, we commented on what Nelson Mandela really represents in terms of generativity. This week we have the lovely coincidence of having this webcast one day after Dr. Oliver Sacks turned 80. And for those of you who have not seen his essay through our discussion forum or on Twitter, I'll refer you to it. It came out on July 6th in the New York Times. You can find links to it again in the discussion forum or on Twitter. And it's entitled "The Joy of Old Age." No kidding, in parentheses. And Dr. Sacks starts by saying, "Last night I dreamed about Mercury, huge shining globules of quicksilver rising and falling. Mercury is the element number 80, and my dream is a reminder that on Tuesday, that is yesterday, I will be 80 myself. Elements and birthdays have been intertwined for me since boyhood when I learned about atomic numbers. At 11, I could say, I am sodium, element 11. And now at 79, I am gold. A few years ago, when I gave a friend a bottle of mercury for his 80th birthday, a special bottle that could neither leak nor break, which is good because mercury is toxic, he gave me a peculiar look, but later sent me a charming letter in which he joked, I take a little every morning for my health. And his essay goes on for 3 pages if you print it out for your reading pleasure, as I have done. And I think that Dr. Sacks has given us an enormous opportunity to launch our discussion about aging well, because he goes on to talk about some of his health concerns and some of his functional limitations, and the fact that he is still thrilled to be turning 80. And I think that's really a theme, I would say, that we've seen in the discussion threads and in the comments to date for this webcast. What about functional decline? Where does that fit in terms of aging well? And so perhaps that's the place to start the discussion. So Liz and Amy, again, welcome. And Liz, perhaps you'd like to start us out by responding to that thought of where is functional decline? Where is a sense of how to place those changes in aging well?
Well, I'd like to think of the whole lifespan as being a series of changes. And we often think of youth and going into adulthood as we're adding more things, adding abilities, adding possessions sometimes, or titles or roles, and so on. And at a certain point in life, it seems like there comes a time of releasing some of that, right? Either by choice or sometimes it's foisted upon us. But it does seem that thinking about it more as a long continuum of change, and that there's beauty and sweetness and richness everywhere along that continuum is a good thing and can help us release some of the fear of loss. Because I think that the fear of loss is worse than actually any kind of true loss of function itself.
Yeah.
And that being able to kind of find balance and learning ways to maximize, optimize health while these changes are happening is a good way of thinking about it, kind of reframing it. And I think the pictures or maps or words, the concepts we carry around internally are really an important part of how we experience aging.
So you mean sort of the mental explanations?
Yeah, and the mental explanations.
Yeah.
So, even something as potentially life-changing as losing your license, not being able to drive anymore. My parents are both in their late 80s now. They're still both driving. I know there will be a time when probably they'll stop driving, and approaching that as, okay, well, I may not be able to do that anymore, but what other doorways does that open for me? I'll have more connection with my neighbors.
Right.
I'll see my kids more often. I'll learn to do things in a different way.
So it's seeing gains where loss seems to be prominent, if that's our mental map or mental explanation of that.
Yeah. And it can take some stretching and maybe challenging at times, but I think it's important
Great.
To see it that way.
Yeah. How about you, Amy? What are your thoughts?
I think that, one size does not fit all, and that everyone's on their own journey and evolution in life.
And that's a discussion thread, that aging well is different for everyone. That is a thread in our discussion forum, so you got it.
Having worked with many people, I think reframing it is important and finding out individually what the benefit and burden of each functional change is and how to navigate it is very important, and it's very individualized.
And so knowing yourself then, and knowing what's right for you, not what is recommended for everyone, is perhaps one of the best ways to understand aging well.
Yeah, and so just to piggyback on the driving the car issue, so I happen to practice in an urban area, so driving is actually not as much of a big deal if people lose the ability to drive, because we have such a great, robust train and bus system and subway system, and so my older adults in this region don't necessarily struggle with that type of an issue, but there are other things that come up.
Yeah,
So.
that's a really good point. Anne, any thoughts on
I actually
what we
wanted to
should
bring up, and I
discuss?
just found it. One of our participants, John Magnus, identified Professor Suresh Ratan of Denmark's 7 Spiritual Laws of Health and Longevity. And the first one is called Rational Optimism, which I thought was very interesting, and it comes into play with what we're just discussing. Not to be, and we've learned through many of our experts coming to speak with us, that positivity is a big part of aging well and well-being in older age. But to be rational about it, instead of, we're not expecting blind optimism in aging well, because that's not reality, but really taking in what are the opportunities I now have. And I think that's a great, that's the discussion that Sarah was talking about. It's called Aging Well is Different for Everyone. It's under Forums, week 4, so I encourage everyone to go and participate in that discussion.
I agree. I think it's perhaps one of the most important ways that I've seen our participants really crystallizing and synthesizing their own understandings of what it is to age well. And one of the things that's come up time and time again that I guess I'd ask all three of you to respond to, because it's such a hot button issue, is the difference, if you want to say it very broadly, between healthy aging and aging well. And I know both of you kind of talked about this in different ways in your interviews, but let me give you some specific examples of things that I've been seeing our participants, all of you, talking about in the discussion forum, and my guess is there are even more of you who haven't posted or commented in the discussion forum. And that is, what should I be doing to age in a healthy way? And what Ann and I have really tried to do is distinguish aging well, that is that individualized sense, where, thank you, John, for that beautiful post, you are rationally optimistic in much the same way that's echoed in Dr. Sachs's essay. And many people are wondering about things like dietary supplements, whether herbal or vitamins and minerals. Many people are wondering about diets, and I think, Liz, it was you who talked about calorie restriction, and that's gotten a good deal of attention in the discussion forum. So I guess my question to all three of you is, what's the difference between healthy aging and aging well, and what do you make of specific advice, like take this supplement or eat that diet? Amy? We'll just go down the line here.
All right. Loaded question here. I guess I would say I always go back to the adage of everything in moderation, and that the latest fad may just be the latest fad, and that we've seen over the past 30 years evidence come out for something and then evidence come out against it years later, or vice versa. So I think that we have not discovered the fountain of youth yet, and that a lot of it is still genetically linked. However, there are things that we know do help, which are kind of the basic things, which is eating well and exercising. Yeah. And whatever it is that you can do to exercise functionally is appropriate. And it may be gardening is what you do for your exercise. And then also for your mind function, keeping your mind active with word games and puzzles. And so those are kind of the key things that we know are helpful. And I know, I remember one of you telling me about a thread about alcohol consumption and the benefit and burden of alcohol consumption. And so I think as well, it kind of goes back to everything in moderation. And I'll stick to that.
Well, and that is something that we've seen, and it's nice to have you confirm it, that we've seen come up time and time again, because people will ask, participants will ask in a discussion forum, what do you think about this, or what evidence have you heard about this? Yeah. And then we have other participants speaking to that idea that there is no fountain of youth, that fads do come and go, that evidence comes and goes, and that a sense of balance, proportion, and moderation is probably most valuable.
Right, and I mean, one example we talked about was alcohol, but the other one was vitamin E. It was very popular for a time, and I remember when my grandfather was taking that, and then it was found to have more risk than benefit. So there were bleeding risks and other things with it. So it was found not to be effective, and so, you know.
That's a good example.
It's hard to know if it's a fad or not.
It's hard to know if it's a fad or not, so probably one of the most important things to recognize, particularly in thinking about what creates healthy communities, is to avoid that reactive, oh, we should be doing that, or this should be a part of any long-term plan, when until we see how the evidence bears out over the long term, there could be hidden risks that we don't understand.
Thinking more holistically, I think, is important.
And that's probably a good place to turn to Liz, because holism is such an important part of your work.
Yes, and so you've both mentioned balance a lot, and so I think a lot about maintaining health, not necessarily regaining health, but maintaining health as keeping your balance on a surfboard.
I like that.
And life will throw things at you. There'll be all kinds of stressors, chemical stressors, physical stressors, psychological stressors, and so on. And those are the waves. and you do your best to stay balanced on that surfboard. And if you fall off, get back on, and so I think the balance piece is really, really important, and the moderation piece is really important. And I'd like to also thank you, Mom, for teaching me this when I was growing up, thinking about what I should eat. You know what she always told me? Listen to your body. And listen to what your body, if you have that sense of what your body needs or wants. I think that if we can connect more with that kind of body wisdom and awareness, that can be helpful. The other thing I thought of was Michael Pollan's quote, "Eat food, mostly plants, not too much." In terms of his advice about how to craft a healthy diet. So I think, you know, for myself, what I do for myself is that in terms of my diet, try to eat whole foods, nothing too processed, move my body, whatever, in as much as you can, in a way that feels good, move your body. Depending on what your limitations are, that might be dancing, it might be gardening, it might be doing chair yoga. And then I also would recommend some kind of mind, body, or spiritual practice. And again, this should be very individualized for different people. For some people, it would be an expression of an organized religion that they are very devoted to, and that's a beautiful thing. For other people, it could be something like Tai Chi or meditation or yoga for older adults, something that helps integrate the mind and the body, that which we can see and experience, and that which is more ephemeral on a daily basis. So that would be my comment.
Well, and those are really, the two of you are offering things that are meaningful, not just at an individual level, because certainly our focus is not about individual health and health care. Our focus is about aging individuals, communities, and societies, and how we can join together to create better solutions and better ideas. And so one of the things I really like about what you're saying, Liz and Amy, is that these are ideas that, if you will, can be translated to community levels and even to societal levels. Anne, what were you thinking about?
Well, I think it's important, and this came up with multiple experts, especially in week 4, I believe in both interviews, is that health we think about as the opposite of disease, where well-being can be present really in any state. So acute illness, possibly we can still have spiritual well-being, if not physical well-being, and also in chronic diseases as well. So if you're living with a chronic illness, be it maybe ALS or type 2 diabetes, you can still find well-being within the framework. So while taking into consideration things like moving your body and eating well, we have to understand, again, everything in moderation. If it's going to feed your soul to do something, even in a disease state, maybe, have a glass of wine. I know we say things like in my own family to my grandfather, who's on a blood thinner, about drinking any alcohol at all. But even just half an ounce of a drink really makes him feel a part of the family gathering. That to him is well-being, the ability to do that. So I think we have to think about healthy we do think about healthy, especially nurses, physicians, researchers, healthy as kind of an opposite of disease, or getting somebody in a disease state to a healthy or a healthier state. Where we think about well-being, there's different dimensions of well-being. A lot of things we saw in the discussion forum were about spirituality and well-being. And be it a connection with God, a connection to our inner selves, and where we feel the best in those states. So people were talking about Tai Chi, while other people discussed regular conversations with a higher being through prayer or through regular, maybe like a church service, a temple service, worship services.
So I think, especially because there is a discussion thread about faith, thinking about spirituality and faith, what sorts of lessons, Amy and Liz, do you think are important to take away from consideration of spirituality and faith practices, particularly as we think about the idea that often, though not always, often faith involves a community, and relationships have also been mentioned in our online discussions of aging well. So what do you think?
You know, I did some field work at a continuing care retirement community some time ago. The average age was 82, so older adults. And the one thing that really came out of the focus groups and interviews that was really interesting to me is that for many, many people, their relationship with a higher power was very personal. And they spoke about it very much as one would talk about a friend. And I thought about all the literature there is on social support and health, and how we know from decades of research that having a subjective understanding that you're supported by people around you, right, actually helps people stay healthier, both mentally and physically. And it occurred to me that people who have this best friend relationship with a higher power may be getting that same kind of immune system bolstering support that we know happens with social support. So I think it's a big piece of it, actually. And I think as we release things in life, so for example, when we retire, we release a job and certain kinds of identification and so on, we make room for other connections, particularly spiritual connections. And I think that is a big piece of that. So connect, you know, the idea of being connected to either people around you, whether it's family members or friends, and also connection to spirit and whatever that means to you.
Right. And that draws on the idea that love seems to be part of aging well. That has come up both on Twitter and in our discussion forum. And there is, as you point out, evidence that relationships, positive relationships, supportive relationships, and love can probably be seen to sort of undergird that, are important to aging and can be connected to the idea of aging well. Great. Amy, any thoughts on that?
I would just go back to the connect in the community piece, and that while Liz talked about the individual relationship and whatever that might be, also the sense of community and having people to talk to and socialize with has been very important in keeping your mind sharp, your mood up, and boosting, you know, for instance, the immune system and your ability to combat illness.
And I think also for older adults who've been, or anyone, for people who are used to being very self-sufficient and powerful and active and so on, if they need help, right, as they age, and maybe there's a loss of function, they're not quite as powerful as they used to be in some area or another, I think reframing it as this is an opportunity for me to allow others to serve and to express their love for me in this way, I think could be a good way to understand the new relationship.
So it's sort of an optimistic new understanding of power.
Well, and that comes up a lot with caregivers. So your child, you cared for them and raised them, and now their turn to help on this side of things. And so that does come up as well in that.
Yeah.
And just because you need help doesn't mean that things aren't going well for you. And that's perhaps one of the more important things that we might be able to extract from this discussion of aging well, because we've tended to think, certainly in North America, about aging well as an individual metric. But maybe what we're talking about are families, communities, and societies aging well. So that aging well is not just about the individual function, power, and autonomy, but that aging well is about relationships and about the value of relationships. And one of the things I'd like to reflect that I think Ann and I have seen throughout the course is that whenever we come across one of these big ideas in Old Globe, like relationships, we see that there are biological, psychological, and social dimensions to relationships. So both Liz and Amy are pointing out for us that positive, supportive relationships actually have biological effects on individuals. They tend to boost the immune system and reduce stress, particularly, and you'll have to think back to Kelly Jordan Shudo and Ruben Gore's interviews, reducing oxidative stress by reducing some of the stress hormones that are released when we don't feel supported and we feel alone and isolated. That's just one example of how this big concept of relationships connects with all of the different dimensions of aging that we've been talking about. The same could be said of the idea of balance and moderation. Balance and moderation have biological, psychological, and social dimensions as big ideas that have been emerging throughout our 4 weeks of discussion in Old Globe. So Ann, I know you're tracking both the course page and Twitter. What are some of the questions that we're getting?
We actually had one from earlier this morning from Peter Timisk on Twitter, and he talks about forced retirement. What can we expect when age discrimination is better addressed in both law and policy? And I think this really ties in well with our discussion on engagement, social engagement, and relationships, and the discussion last week about generativity in older age.
Yeah. So what do you think about retirement, ladies? What comes to mind? Peter's asking us about forced retirement. Some societies, for example, have age limits for either all workers or workers in different fields of work. What do you think is important to think about when we consider retirement and aging well at individual, family, and community levels?
The notion, I think that it's important for everyone to be connected and have a role to play in their community. And I think this notion of, if a person isn't contributing to the gross national product, then they're, out. They're not.
Well, and how do we know who's contributing to the GDP?
Right. So I think the idea is that I've always, the thing I thought a lot about in traditional societies, hundreds of years ago, older adults had a role to play, right? Everyone did something. There was no sense of, well, you can't work in the fields anymore, therefore you're going to just stay in the tent the whole time and not do anything. They passed on stories to the grandchildren, or right?
So educative roles,
roles, or
supportive care.
Yeah, and as guardians of the culture. And I think that we as a society need to
North America?
Yeah, North America,
Okay.
thank you, could do better in that regard in terms of understanding what it is that even the very old can contribute to their communities. And I So I'm not a big fan of the idea of retirement, although I think there's probably certain jobs, like construction workers or something, where it might be hard to do.
So what you're arguing against, what I hear is that you're arguing against this idea that you have a single work life, and that work life begins and ends, and outside of that, you are dependent, either as a child or an older person.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. Very
Okay.
beautifully put.
That's my job, is I try to put those ideas together. So, Amy, what are your thoughts about retirement? Because I think Liz has given us a very strong starting point for thinking about this. And Herb and I, of course, discussed this in our last webcast in week 3 a bit as well.
Oh, so
That's okay.
I think it's very individualized. Again, I'll go back to that point, and that depending on the profession, depending on what the role is that you go into, for instance, in medicine, you may not physically be able to stand up all day and do surgery in the operating room anymore, but you could be in the anatomy lab teaching the medical students how to dissect and understand the human body. And so there's a role change within the profession. And also within families. So when people, maybe they retire from their professional career, but then help take care of the grandchildren or volunteer in their community. So I do think it has to do with their role in society, but it can be limited by profession and professional standards as well. And we don't have a mandatory retirement. It is recognized in the United States as you're eligible for retirement at 62 or 65 and can get Medicare benefits
That's
and things like
all
that.
the time.
But not everybody sticks to that, and it's not a forced thing. It's not like you have to retire unless it's a company policy or something like that. But there are plenty of people who work past that, and again, it's an individual decision. When does it become a detriment to society, though, if you stay in that role? So the counterpoint here is like driving.
Right.
Safety,
Or
an airline pilot, so safety issues, but kind of goes back to functional abilities and less about age.
Yeah, that's
So-
probably really important for us to emphasize, is that I think there's always been an association of advancing age and functional decline. But one of the things we've learned, for example, from Kelly Jordan Shudo, and particularly from Ruben Gur, who himself is perhaps in the older age range, is that some capacities decline with age, others actually improve with age. And so that the linear association of advancing age means decline is incorrect, again, at biological, psychological, and social levels. So what I'm hearing you say, Amy, is that the idea of a definitive change is unlikely to be effective either for the individual, unless the individual is choosing that or needs to do that for a reason, and certainly at a community and family level, changing your roles as you live your life is part of what's important for everyone in that family and community. And that's, again, perhaps then where we're reinterpreting the sort of old definition of retirement in terms of aging well into, it's not really I'm going to retire from, but rather I'm going to move on to. And those of you who haven't watched the Week 3 webcast with Dr. Herb Smith, I think we'll find a good deal of parallel conversation, because remember, Herb's a demographer, happening in that webcast at a societal level regarding roles, functions, and the good, if you will, the value to society. Great.
Yeah, I think that reframing retirement is really important into something that's more about renewing, renewalment.
Or next phase.
The
Yeah,
next
next
phase.
phase.
And to find something that you enjoy doing. I don't think people should be forced to work at jobs they don't like, you know,
Or
forever.
at least if they can avoid that. Because
Right.
certainly we've got people from all over the world, and we do have a number of participants from very low-income nations, and India has been particularly well represented. And they're particularly in situations, and we've talked about issues of poverty and lack of education in aging well. These have certainly come up because we know from Herb's explanation of demographics, longevity, and increasing life expectancy, we know that poverty and the inability to gain access to education have influence on both life expectancy and longevity, two different terms, right? But one of the things I'm struck by is that if we look around the world, what we see is that it's the rare society that can afford, whether they're rapidly aging or less rapidly aging societies, I think it's the rare society that can afford, in the language of one of our discussion threads, to have older people be mere passengers in that societal enterprise. What do you think about that? That the risk to society of having older people sort of retire into dependency doesn't benefit anyone.
I think we're squandering a resource, and the resource is a group of people who have a lot of experience and wisdom.
So there's the idea of squandering a resource. There's the idea of certainly low and low middle income nations not being able to afford not to have the sort of childcare, supportive care, and educative resource.
I also think that in North America that the generation who is aging right now will not just retire. I mean, this is a generation
So you're
that,
speaking primarily of the baby boomers
yeah,
who
they're
are
not-
approaching retirement
This
age.
group is going to be busy.
Yeah.
And they're not going to just say, I'm retired and for lack of a better example, going to sit home and read the paper every day. I mean, this is a generation that will want to be engaged with society and have a meaningful role and continue. And I think that will change the culture of our society greatly. And we don't know what the future will hold with that group, but I do think that that is a change that we will see, and it may happen in other cultures as well.
Well, it's almost certainly doing that, and Herb was the one who asked us to watch old movies, and I know a number of you have, and we even had a blog post about this, when Herb said that we should look at how much life expectancy and roles for people who have reached a certain age have changed. All we had to do is look at movies, film produced in any number of societies from the 30s and 40s, much less the 1920s at the start of the cinema, the film industry. And the quote that got blogged about was, 60 really is the new 40.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that there will be a culture shift. And I don't pretend to know what it will be, but I think, yeah, I think it will be very different.
Anne?
So this topic also brings up a series on the National Public Radio, This American Life, that was done about the increase in people who are on disability in this country, in the United States, and about their early retirement, and really why they ended up on disability was because their education level only provided them to do physical jobs. So they ended up on disability because they weren't able to be employed at their education level doing those jobs with the disability that they oftentimes incurred because of the job that they were doing, because of the physical labor strains that they were doing for 20, 25, 30 years.
And we should just clarify for our audience around the world, for Old Globers around the world, that when we say on disability, that's actually a work status that means you receive social welfare support because you're unable to do the work that you had been doing. So your point about the idea of generative, productive work and the role of education as people live their lives is, I think, very important. Maybe we'll try to find that link to This American Life as a podcast and be able to put that on the discussion forum.
This highlights, and many of our experts, especially Herb Smith, talked about education as really one of the major factors and I think well-being as well. So to continue to educate ourselves, to continue to read, to continue to gain knowledge throughout the lifespan. This has been a big topic on the discussion forums as well, particularly because we have participants across the lifespan.
Right.
And
11 to over 80.
And many of our participants hold multiple degrees that they've gained throughout their life.
Yes.
This is a great point, and there is a quote somewhere. I'm not sure I'm going to remember the whole quote off the top of my head, but if there is a fountain of youth, it's learning. Right?
So,
learning new things,
yes,
whatever
learning
it
new
is.
things.
New information,
Making
new
new connections in your
skills.
brain.
Yes, making new connections in the brain and new connections in the world.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, that is something that's come up, though not directly, and so on the discussion forum. So I think it bears repeating that perhaps if we're thinking about a fountain of youth, and if we're thinking about a prescription for families and communities aging well, remember, Ann and I have strictly avoided being a health course. This is really about aging and aging as individuals, families, communities, and societies. But I think we can easily say, because it has manifold benefits, that aging may in fact be that fountain of youth. And other questions that are coming up on the course page or on Twitter?
I'm going to take a look. We don't have any new questions since the last one, but I wanted to thank Sunny for posting the Oliver Sacks article in the discussion forum for us during our webcast.
Thank you, Sunny, for doing that. As you can see, our course staff, and there are lots of them on 2 different continents, our course staff have been so active and so engaged, and Ann and I know that we couldn't do it without all of our course staff, and that starts with Brian and Aram here. You can't see them, as I always point out. They are behind the camera, though we try to get them on camera, and all of the teaching assistants whose posts you see as staff on the discussion forum.
And I'm sorry, Lutetia said my voice goes in and out when I turn my head, so I'll try to keep it straight on. The other thing in that
Thank you,
discussion
Letitia, for that
forum
feedback.
under Dr. Sacks' letter, Beth Delaney posted 26 minutes ago the evaluation tool for happiness and satisfaction from Penn Center for Positive Psychology and the link so you can take it there. So that will be a fun exercise to do.
That is a fun exercise. We definitely recommend it. Even if you're not active on the discussion forum, look for it under the thread that contains Dr. Sachs's essay. Ann and I think you'll really enjoy that. And Liz and Amy, you've probably had some experience with it as well. I actually have a question that I believe has come up in the forum, though perhaps not for this week, and that is just to get back to how we understand the evidence for aging well. How do we make sense of all of the information? And this goes back a little bit to where we started, but how do we make sense? What are some of the standards or ideas that you all use to evaluate the recommendations that commonly come out? Because this has come up, for example, in the discussion forums about it's olive oil every day, or it's fish oil 3 times a day, or it's a spiritual practice. I have to pray or do Tai Chi. How do you take the popular media interpretations of evidence in particular in terms of aging well, both for individuals but also for families and communities? How do you make sense of that? Are there standards you have in your own heads that allow you to say, well, maybe I can trust this evidence and think about how I can use it in a program I'm developing or for my own life. How do you sort of manage the public media, the lay media sphere, which is ever larger, of course, with the internet?
I would say that I always welcome these questions when I'm seeing patients and families, and so coming in with your list of questions and prepared to ask about them. If you see a commercial about something or a supplement that your loved one may be using and you want to know whether or not it's helpful or beneficial, it's valuable to bring that into the doctor's office, because you don't want to take something that could
So specifically regarding supplements and drugs.
And drugs have an interaction with the medication you're already on for a treatment plan and things like that. And I think that a lot of times your doctor can help you say, like, there's no evidence to prove that this will be helpful, but it's not going to hurt you either. So if you want to try it, that's okay. And I think it's always weighing the benefit and the burden of any of these things. I mean, if it costs an arm and a leg, what's the benefit? What's the burden of that, and what's really the benefit?
Okay.
But if having fish every day is something that you enjoy and you're able to afford and it's feasible, then go for it. But I do think it's individualized.
So I'm hearing two standards from you. The first is to have trusted, knowledgeable advisors, and if you're using a non-person source, if you will, an electronic source, that you want to have some way to understand whether that source is trustworthy. So one of the standards you use is trusted advisors, trusted sources.
Trusted sources.
And the other standard is what's the benefit weighed against what's the burden. And that's true not just for individual health, but think about, for example, the benefit and burden of doing a community project or a community activity. Think about the sustainability as a way of understanding the ratio of benefit to burden.
Or, for instance, my husband has bad knees, so I'd rather him be riding the bike than trying to run these days, right?
Right, so that's a health-focused benefit burden analysis.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's how you approach it. And it's definitely still individualized. And I bring the physician in just for the point of what's the latest and greatest in the literature.
Right.
And they'll help you tease out if it's a fad or not.
For health-specific things.
For health-specific things. And they'll actually be able to tell you if they don't know if it's a fad or not yet. Because one of my rules of thumbs with new drugs coming on the market is often to say, let's give it at least 5 years before I want to prescribe it to somebody that I might be taking care of, because even though it's passed through all these hoops and it has approval, there's still things that come out once it gets into the mass market.
So there's probably then another standard there for evaluating the evidence, and that is go to an advisor whose expertise relates to the question that you have. So for example, if it's a health-related question, a healthcare provider should be doing that evaluation. Thinking about physical activity, for example, for those of our world who have access to a physiotherapist, that's a way to think about, okay, a physiotherapist is an expert in physical movement. We could also say the same of spiritual advisors.
Absolutely. So
yeah.
if, for instance, you're Catholic, you might want to go talk to the priest about what your daily routine would be helpful for you and not necessarily a burden for you.
Yeah.
And I think
Great.
that.
So 3 standards there. Liz,
Sorry,
how about you?
I'm adding to the list.
Yeah, no, that's exactly, that standard really helps. So I think that because you want to have in mind some guidelines, some standards. So Liz, any other standards or metrics that you like to use?
Well, I think it depends a little bit on whether you're trying to actually treat a condition that's debilitating, or
Right,
whether
but
you're
since
just
we're not really
maintaining
conditions,
health.
Yeah,
But
maintaining health.
it's
So
really
in
just
terms of
thinking
maintaining-
about evidence,
Right.
how do I evaluate evidence? How do I evaluate the information I'm getting?
Well, I know, for example, recently there's been, in North America, or at least in the US, a big push for putting people on thyroid medication. I don't know if you've noticed that among older people. Right? And I don't know what the long-term consequences of that are, getting back to your piece about that.
And so that again would relate to the standard of if you've got a health question, you need to seek a healthcare professional's guidance.
But also, if you know the old adage, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I know one older adult who went on testosterone on the advice of one of his many specialists, right? Who then developed deep vein thrombosis.
A side effect from it. Yeah.
So
Right.
benefit and burden again.
But he wasn't sick, really, right?
Right.
So why go on the
Right.
other medication?
Right.
So I think that there's a little bit of that, you know,
Yeah.
unless you're actually treating, you know,
So that
a
standard
serious,
of benefit and
Yeah, I
burden,
would be
but
cautious.
also the goal.
yeah, and
Yeah,
cautious
what's the
about a
What's your
polypharmacy
goal?
in
Yep.
particular.
Right, yeah, and we'll
And-
probably still veer away from health here.
Okay.
Because we're talking about aging well as from a holistic perspective and not really about disease. But I think you're echoing the standards, and you have a point
This
to.
brings up a great point, and I think this should be like our last question. We have about 5 minutes left of our webcast to wrap up. And there was this discussion about things like surgeries, medical care, prolonged medical care. One participant posted an article about as we age, emergency room stays are going to be longer. There's going to be more hospitalizations due to emergency room visits. Who are we doing surgeries in, or these advanced procedures? And is there ageism coming into play here when we say, oh, we don't want to do this? Or has that person decided their goal is to not be in the hospital, not have a long recovery period, or not go to a rehab facility or need people to take care of them after surgery, so they decided not to do that? So these questions come up as our population ages about advanced procedures, hospital stays in older age.
So what comes to mind right now is the push to be socioeconomically conscious of the health care that we're providing, or the care we're providing in the United States at least, and so that we don't extend our resources beyond their capability. However, I go back down to the individual in that functional status more than age is why you would make these decisions about things. And so it will be very challenging for us to say that just because somebody is 90 doesn't mean they shouldn't have a valve replacement, so to speak. And so age, again, is very different than somebody's functional status. And so while we would like to see some of these...
So you mean, I'm just going to interject here, chronological age.
Chronological age.
Chronological age is not really a marker for anything other than receiving a birthday card.
Correct. And
Or
so-
writing a great essay, as Dr. Sachs did.
So I do think that while we are trying to come up with programmatic, community-based ways to help people age well and in place, and we assume that people want to age well in their home, and we assume that they want these things, it still will need to be individualized. So while there may be some blanket ways we're able to manage these things, there's going to have to be some variability based on functional status.
So you're coming back then to this idea that local solutions for families, for communities, are probably much more important to think about than a global one-size-fits-all. And let me just reflect, for example, in America, we spend close to 20% of our gross domestic product on healthcare. That's an extraordinary figure when we compare it with, for example, Hong Kong, where Hong Kong has longer life expectancy than we do in America, and they spend about 5% of their GDP on healthcare. So when we're talking about solutions, and we're looking around the world, especially because we're aiming toward next week, when we're thinking about global implications, your comment, Amy, is so important for us to consider.
I think also we should think about, in terms of healthcare services, thinking about supply and demand. People really don't want to have to go to the hospital.
Right.
Right?
Very few people voluntarily
right? I mean, you
do
want
that.
it there when you absolutely need it, right? But in fact, right, if given a choice, people wouldn't want to use expensive interventions and healthcare technology. So as a society, what I think we really want to do is reduce the demand. So how do you reduce the demand? You reduce the demand by promoting health. And I think that one way to promote health, and I think there's quite a bit of literature on this now, is through some kind of mind-body approach, whether it's Qigong or Tai Chi or meditation. There's actually more published research on this than a lot of people realize. And people have talked about these things as accessing internal technologies. And so that if we're able to use more of our internal technologies, the mind-body connection, right?
Yeah.
Then as we get stronger in those technologies, we may find that we have less demand for the external technologies.
And
Good
that's
point.
probably a wonderful point on which to end. I love the metaphor of internal technology balancing the need for external technology. So I think we're going to have to close for today, but I know Ann and I are just so thrilled, Liz and Amy, that you could come back and join us. Do be watching for our Week 4 summary later this week, and be sure to join us next week at our regular time, 10 a.m. here on the East Coast of the United States for our Week 5 webcast, and then Week 6 webcast will be at the same time the following Wednesday, 10 a.m. here on the East Coast, so check your time zone for that adjustment. We're going to have a bigger group be able to join us for Week 6 our Week 6 webcast. Sorry about that. I think I've been talking too much today if I'm losing my ability to articulate my thoughts. So I'm going to close. Thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you on the course page, Twitter, and Facebook. Bye-bye.